Welcome to Maker's Bar. I'm Akshata Shetty. With more electric vehicles on the road and self-driving testing on the rise, mobility and transportation is changing every day. Our guest today is Brandon Bartneck, who is the host of Future of Mobility, a podcast that delves into the transportation sector as we strive to create and adopt secure, eco-friendly, efficient, and inclusive transportation methods. His areas of discussion include electric and fuel cell vehicles, alternative applications for hydrogen advancement in internal combustion engine, support in autonomous driving, digital connectivity, mass transit, carpooling, on demand rides, and micromobility solutions, among others. He has recorded over 165 podcasts. Brandon is also a VP at Edison Manufacturing and has an undergrad from University of Michigan. Welcome, Brandon.
Thanks, Akshata. Great to be here.
Good to be discussing and chatting with you as well. And first of all, I'm a big fan of your work. I mean, 165 podcast is not a joke, and I have no idea how you did it. So I have to say, big fan of your work. So can you share some insights about your early days of your career and how did you land in this particular field?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, like I mentioned, really excited to be here. What you've built is very impressive, and the way you're approaching it and why you're doing it really speaks to me. So it's an honor. So yeah, Brandon Bartneck, as you mentioned. So I went to the University of Michigan, studied engineering. I have a background in mechanical engineering, and really interested in the way things come together and solving complex problems. So started my career at Boeing, and I was in process engineering, manufacturing engineering, specific to commercial airplanes. So specifically interior of their 787 Dreamliner airplane. Had a tremendous job there. A lot of fun working on a really cool product, which I really enjoyed. But ultimately, I felt too distant from kind of the difference in the impact that my work was making to end consumers and into the world. So the big company wasn't necessarily the right fit for me. So I moved to a company, FEV, which is a German engineering services company, global company, and in a business development role. So then I worked with them, and that company, FEV, they do engineering services throughout the mobility sector. So they work with the companies who are creating safer, more sustainable, more effective, more accessible transportation, and they bring their products to life. They develop products, test, simulate, all throughout the whole ecosystem. And I was in business development, so finding people who we could help essentially, and finding a way to help them, which really cool work. I enjoyed it. Got to work with some of the biggest automotive OEMs in the world, and got to work in autonomy and electrification, and hydrogen fuel cells and internal combustion engines, and all these types of things. And through that process, I came to the realization that I actually really cared about the work that we were doing, creating safer, more sustainable, more effective, more accessible transportation. And I also didn't feel like I really understood the field as well as I would have liked. I mean, I was in the work, but didn't necessarily feel like I really understood kind of technically what's going on. And so various things came together in late 2019, early 2020, and I had this idea of starting a podcast and a way to speak to people who are in the field, experts, leaders who are actually making the impact that I was so excited about, and ask them the questions and learn directly from them about whatever I was so interested in. So started the Future Mobility podcast in early 2020. I thought it was, hey, maybe there's 10 episodes here. We'll cover electrification, cover internal combustion, cover hydrogen, autonomy, and move on. And I was very poorly mistaken in that I've done 160 some episodes here, and I'm just scratching the surface, and the field's evolving, and there's so much cool stuff going on. So I do that as kind of a passion project, something that I care deeply about. And over time, my work has actually evolved too. So early last year, I had an opportunity come up, which was very exciting, and with Edison here. So now I'm vice president and general manager at Edison, and we are a low volume contract manufacturer. So we work with the companies in the mobility space who are bringing new technology to the world, and we do so in a reliable, capital light, and flexible way. So we're really solving the problem, which I saw over and over at FEV, of you develop a cool technology, a prototype, proof of concept, and then there's a large chasm you have to cover before you actually are producing and have a hardware product in the world that allows you to make the impact you're trying to make. And at Edison, we're an enabler for those companies, working alongside them to bring their technologies to the world.
Yeah, I think I think something that is very interesting is it's such a I mean, it's a very hard field to get in. And like you must have been really motivated even as a kid to get into something like this. Like you must have loved mechanical engineering. But that was one subject. I mean, I wanted to stay away from mechanical engineering.
Yeah, yeah,
So
definitely. I mean, there's something, I don't know. There's a Dilbert comment of like the knack, right? Of like, I don't know, certain people are wired differently and really enjoy it, and it happens to, yeah, be a good fit.
yeah, yeah. So I was not a good fit. I still remember my first year of engineering when I had to file something within my mechanical engineering class, and I was like, I'm not doing this ever. Anyways, okay. So, what inspired you to you covered a little bit to launch your podcast, and I have to say, it is like if somebody who wants to be in this space, like they have to listen to your podcast. It is like gold mine, I have to say, literally. So what inspired you to do this? And it's a very like what I do is at a high level, right? What you do is like very deep, and to create such a big body of work is very, very difficult. And you're saying it's only scratching the surface, and I'm like, I don't know what else is there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, how did I? So I mentioned some of it, which is very true. Of like, it's just I'm a very curious person, and I love learning and talking with people and connecting with people, and that was kind of the real driver, and also I guess more so what's kept me doing this, right? Of like, did I mentioned just scratching the surface? So yeah, I go really deep into certain topics. When, for example, autonomy, I've probably covered 15, 20 different times in different aspects, and getting deep into functional safety or applications or commercial aspects or technology stacks or the different approaches to different application segments. And but the thing that's so interesting to me is like it's always the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, right? So like
Yeah.
I get deep into a discussion, I talk about functional safety in an area, and I walk away with that with more questions than I actually answer during the, because like I always want to learn more there. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's part of what's so exciting to me.
Yeah, and generally, what are the topics you cover? Is I mean, all relating to mobility, and how do you kind of decide your podcast topics, or do you decide your guests and then you decide the topic, or how does that kind of work
Yeah,
in your
very,
case?
very difficult question. But so the bounds I loosely draw is it's movement of goods and people,
Hmm.
and it's in a way that's safe, sustainable, effectable, accessible, and
Yes.
that means a lot of different things. So it's all types of on-road transportation, ranging from personal use vehicles to taxi, share mobility fleets, commercial vehicles of all type, as well as things like aviation,
Hmm.
marine, off-road, heavy-duty things, mining, agricultural, forestry, material handling, port applications, supply chain applications within warehouse where you're moving things like autonomous forklifts or AGVs, AMR, autonomous guided vehicles, and autonomous mobile robots. And it's all of those application segments, and then it's technology. It's kind of across the board technology. I mean, propulsion systems definitely interesting, electronics, autonomy, and one of the things like that I've come to realize more and more is that there's a lot of overlap, right? Like a robotic system is a robotic system despite the application segment, right? So like you have sensing, you have perception, you have path planning, you have path following, and you have decisions that are being made, and then you're executing those. And sensors are similar in a lot of different places. The way in which these decisions are being made, yes, every application has their own boundary conditions and the way in which they're actually being applied, but the technology is, yeah, pretty consistent. So it's cool talking throughout all these different application segments and trying to make connections. And it's certainly the people who are developing the technology, but then there's also the people who are implementing the technology. So another one of the core beliefs I have is that, yeah, developing technology is awesome, but developing technology for technology's sake doesn't really move the needle. It's also how do you actually implement that and build a business around it in a way that's sustainable for the future.
I totally hear you. And I think my next question, like just to moving on, I get asked this question a lot, like, how do you do this, Akshita? And I do many other things as well. And how do you determine your guests and things of that sort? I get the question. I get asked this question most very often, but I always say, like, for me, anybody who's doing something interesting, like, I want to talk to them and I want to learn from them, right? So as you started this podcast, what were like your, and starting a podcast is not easy, like, to have the infrastructure and getting everything in order, it's tough. So, like, what was your initial challenges? And people come and ask me, how do I do it? I give them advice, like, how they should do it and things like that. What are your initial challenges when you started Future of Mobility?
Yeah, so I mean, there's technical stuff, right? Of like, what mic do I use? Which software do I use for recording? And fortunately, there's good guides out there. I had someone who happened to have started a podcast in a very different space who was able to send me over like, hey, I did the research. This is the mic to get. This is the hardware you need, and like, so yeah, that was kind of the initial barrier. But then the question, or one of the next questions, is like, I don't know, how do you yeah, find the right people, and how do you also do it in a way that's engaging? And I didn't mention this, but one of the things that was another driver for why I wanted to do the podcast is because I was not good at this type of communication. If you go back and listen to the first couple episodes, like, I'd gotten very good at written communication. I've always, for whatever reason, been good communicating with people in person, but when you add the barrier of a or like a computer screen or like a phone call or whatever, like, not something that comes naturally to me for whatever reason. So part of the reason I wanted to do the podcast was to force myself to get better at that and just get reps and get better. But also that came with the understanding that, like, the first few are not going to be good, and I'm going to work on it, and I'm going to try my best, and I'm going to try to prepare and figure out what type of flow I want and figure out what type of host I want to be. But one of the challenges was realizing that, like, the first episode is never going to be as good as the 100th, but you can't get to the 100th episode unless you do the first one. So you just have to dive in and, yeah, figure it out. And the other one is like finding guests, right? Of like, yeah, fortunately had a pretty good network in the area, so I was able to find some guests, but it is tougher, like, especially when you're trying to go after people who you might not know, but you really want to learn from, trying to make that pitch of, hey, here's this new podcast I started. No one's listening to it. My mom and my best friend, I think, listened to the last episode, but I'd love to have you on.
I totally hear you. I've had so many. Now I don't have that problem anymore. But
Mhm.
I used to have people reject me on my face right away, and I'm like, "Why are you doing this?" kind of a thing. I'm giving you a voice, and you don't want to come. But yeah, I totally hear you. At the beginning, it was very hard, but now it's like I send people, and they accept it immediately.
Yeah.
So tell me now, since you are an expert, I mean, something that people don't understand is, when you podcast, right, you learn so much. It is like, it is almost I mean, in your case, it's a specific field. In my case, is leaders across, right? And I
Mhm.
learned so much from each of them. It's almost it would be very hard for me to learn if I were to read a book or something of that sort. Like, as I'm talking to you, I'm learning from you right now. So you have, like, done 165 podcasts in this space. So tell me, like, what do you think is the progression of autonomous driving, and what are the most promising applications in the upcoming years? And I don't know if you had seen some of my earlier podcasts. I had interviewed Dr. Bebrajit Haldar as well,
Mhm.
who's building Safe AI. And so I'm curious, because you probably have seen so many people in this space now. So what your thoughts are?
Yeah, and I did really enjoy the episode with Bibberjeet, and I talked with him maybe a year or so ago on the Future Mobility podcast, and yeah, he was a great guest. But yeah, that's a good question, right? On the autonomy space and what I've learned. So maybe there's a few things that stand out as like kind of themes across. Um, and one is that, yeah, more and more it's the people who can solve real business needs today really are going to be the ones that are able to deploy and make an impact in the short term. So there still is the holy grail is everyone has an autonomous vehicle. We all have a private use autonomous vehicles that we drive around, and that's just how people get around. They don't have to drive. They own a vehicle that's in the driveway, but they can sit behind it and it takes them where they want to go. I still think we're a long way off from that. Like, we're decades, if we ever get there, right? Like, that's promising, and it's great that there's companies going after that, but the real impact, especially in the short term here, tends to be people like Bipperseat, right? Who, like, they see, hey, here's a need in the construction. Well, there's a labor shortage, or there's dangerous jobs, or there's jobs that are challenging to do. There's, uptime is critical for these things that are hard to operate in various conditions, and we can improve on that by automating this solution that has set boundary conditions, that doesn't have the variability of pedestrians or whatever happens on a public use road. Like, they're able to kind of define a problem that's more manageable and solve that in a way that meets a business need. And that's kind of a common theme that seems to be coming up of like the companies that are actually putting in autonomous solutions, whether it is off-road construction or port equipment, or in warehouses, or like yard trucks, or even autonomous shuttles, which are able to go on fixed routes and stay in certain areas and kind of define their own world. Like, these are the things that I'm most excited about in the short term.
Yeah, I totally hear you. In fact, when I saw Safe AI, I was shocked. So I had been, I think I mentioned that even in that episode, I had been to CES early this year in January. And then I saw the number of companies that were in there, right? And I said, wow, this is interesting. Like, all these people are putting capital into this, right? And then I saw Dr. Haldar's company, and I was like, this I think has some use case versus those that is I mean, where people are putting billions and billions of dollars. And he rightly pointed out something very similar in the episode as well. And he's like, yes, Akshita, I think there is a lot of money pouring in, whereas the real use cases are here. Because this is where challenges are, and this is where it needs to be solved. Like, we have companies like Cruise, which is doing like Windmore. They're doing all these autonomous vehicles, and I'm like, yeah, maybe in San Francisco, but what about the rest of the world? You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
I mean, I live in Detroit, right? And it's there's tough from a weather perspective. I mean, I don't want to discount there are on road like heavy duty truck. I didn't mention kind of commercial vehicles and truck. Like, this is not an easy problem by any means, but like there is some momentum in the heavy duty trucking space, and it's hub to hub, it's long haul on highway, where
Yeah,
the tough thing is you have a very heavy, dangerous truck moving at high speeds, where the risk of, or the problem if something goes wrong is very high. Um,
yeah,
but at the same time, they are able to define it. Or like, you have some companies like Gaddix working on middle mile logistics, and they've been able to down select that you have various types of last mile, whether it's vans or drones or sidewalk robots. There's still the question of how all these things incorporate into the greater social and kind of the ecosystem in urban areas, and like how you don't have the situation that you had with micromobility, where you have scooters laying all over the place, and it maybe is a net negative in certain places. But there's certainly, even on the on-road space, there are seemingly places where they're able to down select into a use case that can be solved today.
yeah, yeah. I totally hear you. So, how many companies, according to you, are chasing the real problems, and how many companies are chasing the problems which are like, what? I mean, I don't know how do you think autonomous vehicles, like normal consumer use, is at least 10 years from now, or is it more, according to you?
Yeah, and this is part of what's such a complex question too. Is like, how are we defining an autonomous vehicle? So like the SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, have set language and levels that go with it. And one of the key distinctions is between an ADS, so an automated driving system, and an ADS, or advanced driver assistance system. And
Yeah,
the question is this vehicle actually driving you, or is it helping you drive, right? And I mean, some people listening might say, well, my Tesla has full self-driving, right? Or it has autopilot. And yes, that's true. And that is an ADAS system, though, and that it drives you, and it does most of the tasks in most situations. So it's great. It functions like an autonomous vehicle in those situations, but it's always with the caveat that you need to be prepared, and you need to be ready to take over, sometimes at a moment's notice, or no notice, which
yeah,
is the tough part. So, and there's others, like GM has this Super Cruise idea and this Ultra Cruise idea, which I think there's something there of like the highway pilot stuff, even in personal use vehicles, has come pretty far, and you drive it and it feels like an autonomous vehicle, because again, it's behaving like one in certain situations, and in most situations it is. And the main question, though, that automakers need to solve is like, how do you handle that transition back to the place where it's leaving the ODD or the operational design domain, that actually where it's safe and that it executes. And it can't be, hey, throw up a red flag 3 seconds from now, I'm about to hit something, so you better grab the steering wheel. Because like by definition, that's not going to be any safer than a human driver who would struggle with that situation. But I think these systems are getting smarter over time, where they're learning and they're seeing, well, here's certain conditions. There's, it's either a traffic scenario or there's a weather condition or something like that that can be predictive, and you can realize, well, I'm very confident right now because I'm driving on a dry kind of straight road. I'm not going to be as confident 5 minutes from now. So get prepared. You can take over. And I think that type of stuff is going to come. I don't even know if we're a decade. Like, I think we're a few years from situations where like functionally it's going to feel like an autonomous vehicle in a lot of situations, but it won't be fully autonomous in all situations for a long time.
So, fully autonomous, at least a decade, you think, or even more? Fully autonomous vehicles.
I mean, part of the question too is like it depends on like, is there ever a need in which a certain vehicle is going to need to do all scenarios at all time? Like,
Yeah.
are we going to need autonomous vehicles that can go through a snowstorm? Like, should I be driving in a snowstorm right now? Probably not in most situations, right? Or like, do I need the same vehicle for this urban area that's also for highways and that can go up mountains? Like, I don't know if there's ever a world in which we need fully autonomous vehicles that can do all situations at all times. So yeah, I think we're a ways out there, but like functionally vehicles that for at least luxury applications, because they're going to be expensive given the sensor suite and the compute and how expensive these things are. But for luxury applications, it feels like we're not even maybe a decade away from having those types of applications in use.
So, tell me, like, what percentage now is chasing, like, the complete autonomy of vehicles, and what percentage is chasing, like, the smaller use cases, like for a shuttle, or what Safe AI is doing?
Mhm.
What is like the percentage right now in the industry, according to you?
I don't know if I can throw a percentage, but I think there's more companies doing the niche applications and doing the more defined use cases. And almost it has to be that way because you see like the burn rate for the company, like the big companies like Aurora, Waymo, Cruise, Argo has gone like it takes a lot of money and a large team to try to do everything or in a certain area, right? And um, you're already seeing some attrition. You're seeing acquisitions and mergers and big OEMs that are working together in the space because they have to, because of just how much it costs. And so you do have the big players still working on this stuff. And again, I think it's a good thing because there is a future state that will be very beneficial to have these vehicles in use. But you're seeing a lot more segmented stuff. And like, I don't know if you haven't thought about airport tuggers, for example, like go do some research. There's a host of companies working on automation for airport tuggers, which I hadn't been thinking about until I go down and everywhere you go in different corners, you see there's
Yeah.
companies working on different things.
Yeah. So where I live, I see Cruise and Venmo all the time. So for me, I'm like, oh, that's interesting, kind of a thing. But yeah, I totally hear you. There are companies which are solving smaller problems, and as you said, the capital that is required for solving this problem is highly intense. Like
Mm-hmm.
unless, I mean, like it's a lot. So it's like you need to figure out what is it that you want to tackle, right? So tell me a little bit about what. Give me an overview on the supply and the OEM landscape. And I ask this because we are going through. There was a time where we could not find cars in the market, right? And that's because we didn't have suppliers. So what is happening within that space now, according to you?
Yeah, and every pocket is a bit different. I mean, I already touched on some of it where like the tech companies kind of how they're scoping things out. All the OEMs are working on probably both an aspect of ADAS as well as ADS, so assisted as well as autonomous systems. But I guess maybe at a high level, right? You have sensors in themselves. There's a ton like LiDAR companies at CES. I don't know if you noticed, like there's dozens and dozens of companies who have their different LiDAR sensor for the different use case or whatever, right?
Yeah. In fact, a good friend of mine, he's my son's godfather. He's working on a LiDAR company. It's called Zendar. And in fact, I recently messaged your podcast to him and I said, hey, if you want to talk to him, I will make an introduction.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so he's been working on it, I think, for 5 years now, and he's been funded by some good venture capital funds in the valley, like Hosla Ventures. So, but yeah, but it's a tough problem. He keeps telling me it's a very tough problem to solve as well.
Yeah, yeah, and would love to chat for sure if he's interested. But yeah, so like lidar or in the data center, different types of radar. Even in lidar, there's a bunch of different flavors where there's continuous, there's pulse for lidar, continuous wave, and they all have their own specialty. Cameras continue to improve mapping. Like there's compute. There's kind of this base layer, and then you have the more integrators or the AV companies that we're talking about. Some of them here, but there's a lot of different flavors. Some of them which are very focused on specific applications. There's others who, for example, I had Oxa's CEO Gavin Jackson on my podcast recently. They're in the UK and they're working on kind of a modular autonomous vehicle kit, and there's a few other companies working in this space too that allows, like, they're not, this base software and is meant to, in hardware, is meant to be applied to different applications, and then there's application segment work done in each of them. And he said, I can't remember what the percentage was, but it's 80% plus of the core work of autonomy is within this modular package, which then you look at the boundary conditions and whatever else goes into a specific use case and where the sensors are and the form factor and the speed and stuff, and you modify from there. So some companies are taking that approach of going after various applications. Others are narrowing in on a certain one. It's also the question of kind of what is the commercial model of, some of them are selling subscriptions with software. Others are, like Attic, for example, I mentioned, of they are not selling autonomous vehicles. They are providing a service. And I think this is how Safe AI works too, if I remember it. They get compensated and generate revenue by providing a service utilizing autonomous vehicles in a way that is somehow better than the alternative, right? And so they get paid on a per unit basis for utilizing the technology. Whereas there are others who are actually selling the technology itself, possibly with fleet management software. So a ton of different flavors within the autonomous vehicle tech companies. We then step in actually as the integrator. So we take this, that a lot of these AV tech companies don't necessarily want to specialize in manufacturing. And this is a challenging, like we've seen it with Tesla and Rivian and others in the electric vehicle space. And it's similar in the autonomous vehicle space of manufacturing's hard if you don't have the background and understanding of how to do this with automotive level quality and scale and stuff. And so that's where we fall into the picture as like the company that helps translate the software into the hardware and actually put it all together. And yeah, there's, I guess, a long way of saying it's a very complex space with a lot of different business models. Like even in the shuttle space, you then have companies that are just utilizing the technology and fleet providers who are buying a fleet and selling a service, who they're not even developing the tech, but they're generating revenue by utilizing some autonomous shuttle. Like there's a lot of business models out there.
I'm sure like you see a lot of companies come up, right, on a daily, I mean, because of the space that you're in and you're talking to so many folks. So what, like, are there any innovations that catch your eye and then you're like, oh, this is interesting? Like, how I said, I went to CES, I saw a bunch of these companies, I saw SafeAI, I was like, this is interesting. So is there anything that catches your eye and say, okay, I think Akshita, this is the space to be in? And I like to ask such questions mainly because like so the people who listen to it say always come back and give me a feedback saying that Akshita, I learned something new after listening to your podcast, and I'm like, okay, thank you.
Yeah, what really catches my eye, so maybe recency bias here, but one of the things that's been really exciting is the forklift space, which I hadn't thought much about. I had assumed, like, yeah, there's little robots running around warehouses, but the larger autonomy within, yeah, forklifts and heavier material handling, and also kind of the adjacent thing of yard trucks once you get on the other side of the wall within a manufacturing facility or a supply chain focused kind of center. There's really cool work there being done, whether it's remotely driven or fully autonomous. And there is a real need and a labor shortage and a skilled labor shortage of the people who are actually operating these. And I was at a conference in Detroit, Automate, a couple months ago, and it's there's companies who have real products, and some of them maybe look better on a show floor than they do in real life. But like there also are ones who actually are putting this technology in place and are automating within warehouses, which is really exciting.
So you're saying forklifts are interesting because they have real use case and application right
Yeah,
now. Houses,
and
yeah.
the technology has, and it all comes together, right? Of like the advancements in on road and off road and mining and stuff, like they're all learning from each other, whether directly or indirectly. And
Yeah.
it feels like now we're at this place where the sensors as well as the perception and actuation, all like it's the by wire drive systems and stuff. It's at a cost point and a price point that makes sense in these applications.
Yeah. So, so I have seen, and I would say I'm still an outsider of the industry. I have seen a lot of Amazon warehouses use some of these automated forklifts, and I don't know if we are talking about the same ones. And I've seen videos of those, right? Are we
Yeah,
talking the same ones, or we're talking about something more industrial, right? So,
there's a few different flavors. I don't know exactly which ones you're talking about, but
yeah,
it scales or is scaling now from smaller all the way up to
those are smaller, just
five
to
meter type.
kind
Yeah,
of, yeah, yeah.
and I
From what
mean,
I
if you go down the manufacturing rabbit hole, there's an incredible amount of things being done of different ways for material picking and movement without warehousing. So that whole space is really interesting.
Yeah. So, okay. So, if somewhere where somebody were to pick up a problem and solve in this space now, and it looks like this, as you rightly pointed out at the very beginning of the podcast, like so I'm just scratching the surface with 165 podcasts, right? And so, what do you think like a person should solve if an entrepreneur was coming in and he wanted to solve a particular problem in this space? What would be the like the easiest or something that needs to be really solved at this time, according to you? Or do you need large amounts of capital for everything that needs to be solved?
Yeah,
I see
so
a smile on your face.
I'll give two answers. Maybe the first kind of is not exactly what we're looking for, but like what, but and then I'll maybe give a real answer. So the first is right. So the space that I mentioned that Edison's serving in, like I legitimately feel like there is no one serving this product or this space, and like there's a gap that we're filling of low volume autonomous vehicle assembly, retrofits, and upfits that are done in a flexible, reliable way. Um, and the ability to execute that without incredible amounts of capital up front, but also bring in automotive level quality is, I don't know, we have a unique kind of skill set of backgrounds and an experience that are coming together. So if you really want to make an impact in the space, give me a call or shoot me a note on LinkedIn. We're always looking to hire people who want to do great work. Um,
Yeah.
the other side of the maybe zooming out and assuming that you don't want to come work for Edison is if I don't know, maybe this is more generic, but I think the interesting thing is the combination of technology and domain expertise, right? So like if you really understand agriculture, or if you really understand port work or like marine applications or something like it, and if you can get in and build a deep amount of domain expertise and really understand the economics of that scenario and the needs of the end consumer, I think that's where the opportunity continues to be. It's not necessarily looking at it from a technology up perspective, because like a lot of people there's a lot of really great work being done of like how do we build better autonomous vehicles. But I think where I am increasingly excited is like when I hear about someone who is solving a specific problem, as we're talking about. So like, yeah, if you do have someone you grew up on a farm or whatever, right, and you understand a certain aspect of a need more than someone else, maybe that's the opportunity to come in and do something unique.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting that you say that. And I remember when we did the Safe AI podcast as well, even Birujit mentioned like finding talent is harder in the space, and that's because you can't get a combination of all like the engineering, the hat, the field expertise. Like if somebody was working in a farm, I mean, that kind of talent now is like hard to find. Right? How many people would like really work in a farm and who has gone and done some kind of engineering degree, and it's kind of very hard to do. So I
Mhm.
totally hear you. So tell me, how has the industry transformed? I mean, across your, I mean, when you started future mobility to now, right? There's a little bit more press around it, thanks to Winmo and Cruise, all the vehicles running around. But and those are really cool things, fancy things that you see, right? And that tends to get a lot of press.
Yeah.
So, but how has the industry changed since you started versus now?
Yeah, and one caveat is like I don't know how much this is the industry changing versus my perception as
Yeah.
I've learned more about the industry, but it feels like we continue to go through these hype cycles in different areas, right? Where the press public perception of a certain area comes in and they're really so robo taxis, for example, to start of like, hey, here's this really cool application for what if you had an Uber that didn't have a driver, and look at the economics here. Like this can't be that hard to solve because you're just going short areas, and like everyone's excited of like, yeah, these are coming. They're and then we have a downturn rate of like, yeah, people realize no, this actually is very hard, and a few companies who are working on it fail and go bankrupt, and they come out on the other side, and then like robo taxis for specifically keep going up and down as you have different political incentives and different whatever
Yeah.
situations come up. But we've seen in other areas too. Like I think autonomous trucking is another one. So I've already mentioned it, but I had the feeling at least that say 2 years ago, right? Like there was this revelation of, well, no, robo taxis are and personal use vehicles are really hard, but what if you only have to deal with highways? What if you didn't have to deal with getting on and off and didn't have to deal with passengers in urban areas? Like this seems like a pretty simple solution. And like that, no, I don't know if anyone necessarily directly in the industry was saying that, but that was the general perception that I sensed. And
Mm.
then you get to a realization. Sometimes this is sparked by a safety event. I don't think it was in this situation, or like the cost of capital just increases significantly, like it did like a year ago or in the last year,
Yeah.
and yeah, a few companies go bankrupt that seemed like they were doing great, right? And
Yeah.
suddenly you realize, well, no, this problem, although it is simpler than general use autonomy, it's still really hard. There's still
Yeah.
a lot of variables. The stakes are high. So that's maybe the biggest thing I've seen is just these hype cycles that come and go. I don't think it's so much that the people who are really tight in the industry have seen them because they actually understand what's going on in the background. But at least from public perception, you have
Yeah.
different areas that come in and out of vogue.
Yeah. Totally get it. So tell me, as we're almost closing towards the end, tell me a little bit about a book or a mentor event that helped you like shape your path. And I feel like you are onto some great things, especially with the body of work that you have behind you. If somebody deeply pays attention to it, they'll immediately understand. Like anything that like that has like deeply inspired you. And I've had like books, mentors, events that have deeply inspired me, and that's why I'm here. I'm a
Yeah,
product of all of those.
yeah, without doubt. I mean, mentors. I think maybe too many to mention, and also, but maybe thinking and yeah, I don't want to the mentors that probably have the biggest impact, right? Of people who I can talk to and learn from in my personal life, whether it's family, friends, or people I run into professionally. But maybe thinking of things that your audience here could actually, tap into. So one, in the journey into the autonomy space, there's a book, Autonomy,
Yeah.
by Larry Burns. And he was past podcast guest. Actually, I'll be talking with him again here soon. So keep an eye
Okay.
out for a upcoming future mobility episode. But global R&D leader at GM in 2010, deeply involved in the Waymo, Google X, and the DARPA challenges and stuff. Wrote a fantastic book on kind of the origin of autonomy and how it comes together, and it helped me really understand the key players, how things have evolved over time, where this industry came from, and then you can make better guesses about where it might be going. And then
Yeah.
besides that, on the professional side and also somewhat the personal side, a book, "So Good They Can't Ignore You" by Cal Newport, is one of my favorites and most impactful ones. So
Okay.
I, maybe like others who are highly motivated in wanting to make an impact. Like I came into the professional world, I
Yeah.
was not satisfied. I'm like, guys, I'm not making the impact I want to. I'm not fulfilled. So like I was looking for other things, looking at side hustles, doing other things. And then I read this book, and pretty much the premise is, if you want to have an impact, if you want to become passionate about something, if you want to be able to design the life and the work that you want, start
Yeah.
by just getting really good. Start by
Yeah.
doing whatever opportunity you have in front of you, do it as well as you can.
Yeah.
And through that, so for me, it was sales at the time, right? Like I'm not super excited about like selling things, but I then learning how to get good at that, learning the communications, that opened the door to then me realizing that sales is more than just transactional sales. There's a lot more to it, relationship building, and that's
Yeah.
opened the door to so many different things that I'm now passionate about.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you say that, right? When I started the podcast, it was, I told you, it was for very different reasons. Whereas now it has become about leadership and all of that. And I realized through this whole process that I need to understand how the YouTube algorithm works. Like, you know, my background,
Yeah,
obviously. It's a waste of my brain cells to know how YouTube algorithm works. But now I know it. I mean, obviously, I have outsourced a lot of the things to others, but before I outsource, I knew I had to know what I have to outsource. So, like, even if I was doing it, like, for, even if I, my main job is not to know what YouTube does or YouTube's algorithm does, at least I need to know at a high level, like, what, how do I, deal with this challenge. So I totally hear you when you said, like, you have to get good at what you do before you, like, give it to others or whatever, right? So I
yeah,
totally get it. So, any advice that you want to, like, there would be young kids who probably want to, get into this space. And I wish when I was growing up, like, there was YouTube and there was all kinds of podcasts, because I think I would have been a very different product now.
yeah,
Unfortunately, they were just building YouTube when I was growing up. I don't want to date myself, but so any advice that you would want to give somebody who's trying to enter this space, and either build a company or just work in this space? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the first is what I just mentioned, of like figure out what skills are valuable and go and acquire those skills and figure out what you can become good at and then where you can apply those.
Yeah.
Another though is like, I don't find interesting things to work on, that and working on challenging things with people who share, I don't know, people who are good to work with, right? Like people who want to work along with you and win, be part of teams that are working on something meaningful and significant, even if you have the slightest role in the organization, right? Like if you have a small role, you get that job, you do it well, you'll get asked to do more
Yeah.
exciting things, right? And over like that, I've seen it how countless times, right? Of like, yeah, do more than you're asked for, do it well, and you then get to do the things that you actually care about.
Yeah, totally hear you. And thank you, Brandon. This was amazing. I learned a lot personally from this podcast, as usual. And thank you for coming and educating my viewers and educating me as well about this space a little bit. And I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, thanks, Akshatha. Well, likewise, really enjoyed the discussion.
Yeah.